Hi. All right. I want to talk a little bit about the Parsha and then get to Chanukah. See if that works. All right. It's more last week's Parsha also, but talk about Yosef being in jail. Rachel, there's a little bit a little part will be repetitive from last week, but Yosef, we know, was captured, was sold into slavery by his brothers, and then he eventually wound up in Egypt, and then he finds himself in jail, right? And then he's in Potiphar's house, and then he's in jail, and then eventually he interprets the dreams of the servants of Paro, and then he interprets Paro's dreams, and then he becomes second in command to the king of Egypt, and then the brothers come and the whole story, and he reveals himself. I know I'm giving spoilers to the coming week's Parshas, but one thing we see that when he was in jail, he asked, after he interpreted the dreams for the baker and the butler, he asked the butler to remember him when he got freed from jail. Please remember me so that Paro will set me free. And we find that Yosef was punished for 2 years longer in jail by Hashem for asking the butler to remember him. So the question is, obviously, why? Well, first of all, we know that Yosef had a lot of trust in Hashem, right? That was clear. But why would he be punished for asking the butler to remember him? And to the point where it was 2 years more in jail, right? We're all supposed to have trust in Hashem, but we're also supposed to put effort in, right? We're not supposed to just sit at home and hope we earn a livelihood. We have to go out and earn a livelihood. You have to put your effort in. It's called hishtadlus, right? The famous story. The story was even mentioned on The West Wing, best show ever. If anyone's saw that, to President Bartlett. But the famous story goes that there was a fellow who there was a flood coming. And the police car comes and says, time to evacuate, there's a flood coming, you're going to die. He says, no, God will save me, God will save me. Then he says, fine. So then later the water's rising and a boat comes, and the guy says, come on, got to go. He says, no, God will save me. Then finally the helicopter, he says, God will save me, I don't need your help. And then he dies, and then he goes to heaven. And he says, God, why didn't you save me? I had trust in you. He says, what do you mean? I sent you a police car, I sent you a boat, and I sent you a helicopter. Right? We're not just supposed to sit around. We're supposed to put in effort, and in addition to having trust in Hashem. Obviously, the main thing is to trust in God, and God can do everything, but we're supposed to have put in some effort. So what was the deal? Why was Yosef punished for seemingly putting in a little effort to have the butler remember him, mention him to Paro that he should be saved? So I want to go through 3 explanations that I saw for this, and I think each of these explanations, the first 2 primarily reveal about the practical way a Jewish person is supposed to balance having trust in Hashem and putting an effort into the world. So the first is from the Beis Halevi. The Beis Halevi writes, I heard this from Rav Nachum Katz from the Menal Ben Kolel, he said over these answers, the Beis Halevi writes that Yosef was on a very, very high level of trust in God, right? He was a very holy person. And he says, holier people are expected to do less in the physical world when it comes to putting in effort and hishtadlus than a regular folks. Meaning, the trust in Hashem of the holier people is more effective than, let's say, I don't want to say it like that. If someone's on a higher level, he is supposed to put in less effort to accomplish things in the world in a practical sense and rely more on his faith of Hashem. So on Yosef's high level, who was very, very holy, and he had a lot of trust in Hashem, he was supposed to not ask the butler for assistance. That was going beyond what he should have done on his particular level. And that's why he was punished for that. For example, there's some great rabbis, I think they say the Stipler, right? If we're sick, right? I'll get back to Stipler. If someone's sick, we take medicine. We have trust in God that God will make us feel better and will heal us. But we also go and take medicine. We do our put in practical effort to get better. We go to the doctor. There are some holy rabbis, I believe the Stipler was one of them, they were reluctant to take medicine because they felt they were on that higher level of bitachon, that they shouldn't need to take medicine and that they should primarily focus on putting their trust in Hashem, because really God's in total control and God could heal us if we take medicine or not. But us normal people, we're supposed to put in a natural effort. But for the holy rabbis like the Stipler and for Yosef, he should have relied more on the trust in Hashem. I take medicine. I'm not on that level. Maybe you guys are, but I'm not. So that was one explanation of the Beis Halevi. Because of Yosef's level, he shouldn't have asked the butler. Now the Chaz, yeah.
Should that rabbi have realized what level he was at?
No, this rabbi was on a high level. He was very holy.
Yes,
he was very holy. Right, you have to know yourself. There's being humble, but there's also knowing yourself, right? We all have a sense where we're holding religiously. So if even humility just means that we recognize, compared to Hashem and perhaps what we could achieve with our potential were very lacking. But we all know in general where we are holding, what levels we're on, where we could improve, where our strengths are, where our weaknesses are. So this rabbi, he was a very humble person, but he recognized on his level, on his religious level, what he's been working to his whole life, he didn't need to take medicine for certain things. I don't know, I think it could be for certain things. I've met other rabbis that they try not to take medicine if it's not for a serious thing. I think that person I'm thinking of, I think it's more because he's worried about the side effects, so that's not a good example. But but I know a person, I know a holy rabbi, I'm not going to mention who it was. He was in New Jersey for,
On Shabbos, you can't take medicine.
On Shabbos you can't, that's correct. For a different reason.
I know, so
right.
Everybody cannot take medicine.
Right, on Shabbos,
Doesn't matter where you're holding.
Right, on Shabbos, but that's for a different reason. That's because there's a rabbinically that you're not one is not supposed to take medicine on Shabbos. Now again, there's exceptions if it's for a serious condition or if it's medicine that's taken all the time, because the rabbis made a law that one can't take medicine because they were worried that you would come. They used to make medicine by pounding things up, and that's one of the Shabbos labors. So they were worried that if a person would take medicine, that he might come to make the medicine on Shabbos, and they made that law. That's a separate thing.
I thought there's gemachts now, so that you could get medicine on Shabbos.
Oh, on Shabbos?
Yes.
Well, if a person, in general, if someone is so sick that he has to go lie down in bed, then he's not allowed to take medicine. But if someone just has a slight headache, you're really not supposed to take medicine. So there's different, there's exceptions and different rules. But just in general, they made that law. So the first reason that the Beis Halevi was saying was, I just want to say that story with the rabbi. The rabbi was in a hospital in New Jersey and to do a surgery, and they wanted to move him to some very wealthy person wanted to move this rabbi to Columbia Presbyterian, where they could do this, where he felt that was for sure a better hospital, and move him there to have the surgery there. But this rabbi felt that, he's at a good hospital, and the level that he was on with the trusting in Hashem, it was fine to have the surgery here. Now, that doesn't mean if you're in a subpar hospital, you shouldn't go to a better hospital, but you don't have to go to, he felt he doesn't have to go to the super best top-of-the-line hospital, and if he's in a good hospital, going to a good hospital and trusting Hashem is enough. Okay, that's the Beis Halevi. The Chazon Ish says a slightly different interpretation. He says that a person has to put an effort in this world, in addition to having trust in Hashem. But any person, not just a holy person, but any person shouldn't do something which is ridiculous and no chance of working, right? Like if a person doesn't have a job and he's just desperate for money, so he buys a lottery ticket and he thinks he's going to win the lottery, that's something ridiculous. There's no chance that's going to happen. Or just trying absurd things that are not realistic. That God doesn't want a person to do. God just wants the person to put in what a normal person does to be successful, to go to a job fair, to look online for a job, for example. And he says the butler was known to be a very untrustworthy person. And what Yosef did, by Yosef asking him, that wasn't considered a normal act of hishtadlus, of putting in effort. Since he wasn't an untrustworthy person, it was like buying a lottery ticket. Because sometimes when people are desperate, they do crazy things, right? When a person's desperate, he does crazy things. So when we're in that situation, the point is not to do crazy stuff, but rather to trust in Hashem. Okay, and that was the second interpretation. The third one's a little different. It's from Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld. He was the Rav of Yerushalayim. There's a great book about him. I was very inspired when I read it in high school, called Guardian of Jerusalem, about his life. Very, when they lived, it was before the state of Israel, and the people who lived in Jerusalem at the time were very poor, and it shows what they went through. And very holy people lived there. And I think he was there during, he was there during the Hebron massacres. I mean, different city, but you can imagine what Israel was like back then. So he says we could learn why Yosef was punished from Nadav and Avihu. Different story in the Torah. Nadav and Avihu were the children of Aaron, and they brought a sacrifice in the temple when they weren't supposed to. And since they brought the sacrifice when they weren't supposed to, they were killed. But he says, Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld says the real reason they were killed was when the Jews sinned with the golden calf. Their father Aaron protested, but they didn't. Why didn't they protest? Because their father was taking care of it. They showed respect and deference to their father. Let him do it, and it will be silent. So how come they didn't show respect and deference into the temple when he was the high priest and they went and brought a sacrifice? So he says that it shows retroactively that their reason for not protesting for the Egel wasn't a good reason, because it shows they weren't showing the proper deference over here by bringing a sacrifice. So he says the same thing with Yosef. Why didn't Yosef try to send word back to Israel, to Yaakov, his father, that he's living in Egypt and he's safe. Because Yosef knew that he trusted in God, that he must be here for a plan. He must be here for God's plan. So as long as Yosef was going with that higher, the knowing that God has a plan, and that's why he didn't contact his father, and he was trusting in God, then he had a valid reason. But however, later when he asked the butler for help, let Paro know that I'm, to remember me. So retroactively, he was showing that his trust in God. He was really being punished for that since he didn't send a message to his father, because it showed an inconsistency in his trust in Hashem. So that was a little more of a drush explanation. So fine. So we had the first two explanations were that Yosef was on a high level, so he should have had more bitachon, and the second was from the Chazon Ish that he did something which was considered desperate, and that while we're supposed to put in, we are supposed to put in effort to. In the world and to for different things in hishtadlus, one shouldn't put in an effort which is not normal, like buying a lottery ticket. Okay, any questions on that? Ready to go on to Chanukah?
Okay.
Yes.
There are other reasons. I think there are other reasons that said that Yosef was part of the what do you call minion of the brothers had like a. What do you call? They would excommunicate anybody if anybody would tell Yaakov.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I read about it.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, if you send it to me, if you.
It's Myanmar.
Oh, okay, yeah. I want to check it out. Yeah.
Russia and all kinds of stuff. So Yosef bound himself to that also, so he couldn't just send word back to his father.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that I never heard.
Yeah.
Oh, geschmack. Okay. All right. What's Chanukah all about? So I saw this. I posted this last year. I just reposted it today on Facebook. The story Yuri Gagarin. Is that how you pronounce his name? You know who he is? First man in space, 1961. So Khrushchev, when Gagarin came back, Khrushchev said that Gagarin flew into space but didn't see any God there. All right, he's proving the Soviet Union's atheistic ideology. There's no God because an astronaut went into space and didn't see God. All right, we know it's absurd because God can't be perceived with the physical senses. But that is actually a pretty good example of what the Greeks believed. The Greeks believed that nothing existed except what could be sensed with the physical senses. If you can't see it, touch it, smell it, hear it, didn't exist. The fact that there was a God, that there's spirituality, that was something which the Greeks did not believe in and they were totally opposed to. But we know, as Jews, that we have a soul. Just because something can't be perceived through the physical senses, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There's such a thing called spirituality. We all have a soul which yearns to get close to Hashem. Right? We have part of us that God put that can't be perceived. Right? You can't just like we were mentioning a few weeks ago, that angels, according to the Rambam, can't be seen because they're totally spiritual. It's in a different realm of existence, just like, not exactly like, but just like we can't see radio waves or x-rays or things like that, we can't perceive with our senses. So too, there's such a thing called the neshama, there's spirituality, a yearning to get close to God that can't be perceived with the physical senses. Actually, there's an interesting book by Sir Anthony Flew. He was an atheist his entire life. And he became a believer in God. He was a scientist. He became a believer in God because he felt that every person just has this natural inclination and that knows that they have this innate morality that they know in general between good and evil. I should really check before what he said. I'm not exactly sure how he expressed it, so I don't want to misrepresent him. But basically from a moralistic argument that he felt that every human being has a certain innate moral sense and a sense that there's something greater than himself, that he came to a belief in God. But you should just double check, because I might have misquoted what he said. But there is definitely true that we know that there's more than just our physical existence. There is a spiritual world, and this is what the Greeks couldn't stand. The Greeks believed, I mentioned this before, I'm not sure if I mentioned it here or somewhere else, the rabbis refer to the Greeks as darkness. Choshech, Yavin zu Choshech. Why were the Greeks darkness, right? The Greeks were some of the most cultured people that ever lived. They invented democracy. They were philosophers. They had beautiful art, beautiful architecture. My high school history teacher said when she went to the Parthenon, she cried because it was so beautiful. So, right, how could it be, right? You hear some people hear like a beautiful symphony and they cry, or they hear beautiful music. Some people, many people. Or they see beautiful artwork and they cry. There's a beauty there. And the Greeks, they were the champions of that. They were known for that, their prowess and their expertise in all these fields. So how could it be that the most cultured nation was called darkness? So the reason is because they made that those things, the art, the music, the literature, the philosophy, the purpose of life. They replaced Torah. When you try to replace Torah with something, that's called darkness. They made it the goal of their life. So as Jews, we believe that the goal of life is to live beyond ourselves, to care for others, and not live for our own selfish desires. The Greeks said, no, they just viewed art and music and all of these other things as another way to enhance their personal pleasures, right? Just like some people enjoy watching football and eating wings and drinking beer, that's their personal pleasure. The Greeks had art or music. You have a little more refined personal pleasure. But what's the end goal? It's because I enjoy it. I get an enjoyment out of it. That was the whole purpose of life, according to the Greeks. And that is the true darkness. I think I mentioned this story before. It was printed in Haaretz. Dr. Mangala was a violinist, and he was a great connoisseur of the arts, just like most of the Germans were. And there was a woman who was in the camps who was a concert pianist, and Mangala used to make her play Wagner or whatever, and he would play his violin with her, and he trained a dog that every time she would make a mistake or miss a note, the dog would bite her. And she had scars for the rest of her life because of that. She survived the war. Right? How could it be that a culture which was so refined, the Germans, and so cultured, and Wagner and art and Goethe and all these philosophers and writers they had, how could they be so barbaric? So the reason is it's very simple, right? It's coming from the misplaced theory that if someone's more cultured, it means they're a better person, they're more moral. But as we know, that if that's the purpose of life, just doing these things of art and music and the refined humanities, that doesn't make a person more moral. That's not what a human being is made for. Rabbi Feldman writes this, actually, in his book. I highly recommend it, called The Eye of the Storm. So he has an article about this story that I just mentioned, and he says that the mistake was that they thought being into the fine arts makes a person more human. He said that's not what makes a person more human. What's the difference between a human being and an animal? An animal goes for its selfish desires and its instincts. So a human also can go for its selfish desires and their own instincts. That just makes a human a two-legged animal. The fact that you like art and music, okay, so you have a more refined taste. So what makes a human being different? I'm just going to actually summarize what he said here. He said that a man is more human. What makes humanity different is that he pursues other interests besides his personal gratification. If he dedicates his life to selfless pursuits, he cares for others, and he wants to serve God, that's how a human is different from an animal. But a human who is into the fine arts, he could just be an animal. Just he has more refined pleasure-seeking abilities than an animal. Instead of drinking beer, again, he likes listening to symphonies. But that's what the Greeks couldn't stand about the Jews, and that's what a Jewish culture is. Jewish culture and Jewish values is that we live life for the purpose of serving God and being selfless, and that the Greeks couldn't stand. Did you know that besides the famous decrees that the Greeks made, right? They said that we can't keep Shabbos, we can't do Bris Milah, we can't do Rosh Chodesh and keep the holidays. They also specifically made a law that the Jews couldn't keep Sukkos. Right? Why Sukkos? What's unique about Sukkos? So if you remember, on Sukkos we bring animals, we bring parim, cows, as sacrifices to represent the nations of the world. And every day of Sukkos we bring a lesser number of cows than the day before. The reason we do that is because we want the power of the nations of the world and the secular ideology, the ideology where man is just focused on himself and his own personal gratification. We want that ideology to die out. And we want the Jewish ideology where people live for others and are selfless and live for God. We want that ideology to win out, to be victorious. That's why the Greeks couldn't take Sukkos. The whole message of Sukkos was anathema to them. That I heard from a book. I read this from a book, A Kingdom of Priests by Rabbi Moshe Leiter. It's in Hebrew. It's actually it's called Mamlechas Kohanim. It's in Hebrew. And it's like one of the best books, in my opinion, that I've seen about Chanukah. He just really talks about every aspect of it, right?
English translation of it?
I haven't seen it. But yeah, he goes through Megillah Antiochus, the story of what happened with the Greeks, and I don't understand why they don't make a movie about it. It's like so fascinating. When they started,
Spielberg.
what?
Tell Spielberg.
Yeah, tell Spielberg. He'll probably ruin it with some Hollywood agenda, but whatever. No, like the beginning, you just like think what the Maccabees were doing in the Hashmonaim. The Greeks took a pig and slaughtered it as a sacrifice on the Mizbeach in the temple. And Yochanan ben Matisyahu, one of the Maccabees, he couldn't take it, so he goes up to Nicanor's palace, the Greek general that was there, and he said, "I'm ready to become a Greek." So Nicanor says to him, he says, "Prove it. Sacrifice a pig on the altar." He says, "If I do that and the Jews find out, they'll kill me." So he says, like, send everyone away. So Nicanor sends away all of his soldiers. So it's just him and Yochanan ben Matisyahu. Yochanan ben Matisyahu says a prayer to Hashem, and he takes a sword from underneath his robe and he stabs him, kills the general, and that's how the whole rebellion started. It's like a very just the Hashmonaim could not take such a Chilul Hashem happening, but that's the Greeks. What their whole thing was, right? They didn't want to kill us. That wasn't what they were trying to do. Most of the other exiles we were in, they tried to murder us, try to destroy us. We're very familiar with that. But this was the first time the Greeks didn't want to kill us. They wanted us to be like them. They wanted us to take their secular ideology that, no, you don't have to live for Hashem. You don't have to live for a higher purpose. You can live, but you have to be a Greek. You have to just live for yourself. And that's why they couldn't take Sukkot. That's why also in Ma'u Sur, we say, Upartzu chomos migdalai v'timu kol hashmanim. They destroyed all of the walls and they contaminated all of the oil. Right? We know that they contaminated all of the oil. Right? Very famous. So we understand. What does it mean that they broke down the walls? What walls did the Greeks break down? So in the temple, you've been to Yerushalayim many times, right? You ever on Har Bayis, you have right now we have where the dome is. That's where the temple was, and around the temple, on the Temple Mount, there was a wall. And on that wall, there was an inscription in Hebrew and in Greek, and it said, any non-Jew who enters here is going to get killed. Non-Jews were also allowed onto the Temple Mount, but they could only go to a certain point, right? Regular Jews could go a little further, but they couldn't go where the Kohanim could go. The Kohanim could actually go inside, and then the Kohanim couldn't even go where the Kohen Gadol could go in the Holy of Holies, and he could only do that during Yom Kippur. But this wall around the temple was called the Chil. It was specifically designed as a separation between Jews and non-Jews. The Greeks could not take that there was such a separation. They couldn't take that there's a Jewish people with this higher level ideology telling the world to live for selfless reasons and themselves. So that's what it means. Upartzu chomos migdalai, they destroyed these walls. You can go into the Jerusalem Museum and you can actually see the stone in Greek where it makes this difference between...
Which museum?
The Israel Museum in Jerusalem. You know where they have the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Okay.
So there's a huge museum in there besides the Dead Sea Scrolls. Most people, like our tour, when we went the first time, they just took us to the Dead Sea Scrolls and they didn't take us to the rest of the museum. There's a ton of stuff in there.
Agreed, but I've gone through it umpteen times.
Yeah, I'm sure.
No one ever mentioned it.
I've seen it. I remember seeing it. I don't know if it's still there. But they have the that stone. But that was the point, that the Greeks couldn't take that there was a difference between Jews and the rest of the world in also their ideology. And that's something on Chanukah which we have to, how do we celebrate Chanukah? Besides eating latkes and lighting the candles, we rededicate it to ourselves. What does it mean to be a Jew? Being a Jew means that we live for a higher purpose. We want to teach the world that the reason for life is not to fulfill our selfish desires, whether it's eating wings, watching football, and drinking beer, or going to a symphony and appreciating fine art at the Met. Right? Both of those are the same thing. The reason of life is to worry about other people, to care for them, to serve God, and to live for selfless pursuits. Right? Animals don't do that. Animals just live for themselves. Human beings have the potential to live for a higher purpose, and there's no point of living if we're not living for a higher purpose. Right? We can think there's so many people out there that need chesed. People that are sick or lost a loved one or going through tough times. And what we should be doing is trying to find ways where we can help other people. We always think about ourselves. Mar Shiva said a very simple thing, but it's so true. Most of the day we think about ourselves. How am I feeling now? What am I going to do later? How is my day today? How often do we say, oh, look at that guy. He looks a little sad. I wonder what's bothering him. Let me see if I can go help. Just doing a simple thing like that, if we do that, it can really make a tremendous impact, not only on his life, but even in our own lives. What's also interesting is that there's a term called misyavnim. Misyavnim were the Jews who took on the Greek ideology, right? It wasn't just a war between the Jews and the Greeks. There, to some extent, or to a large extent, it was a war between Jews and Jews, because Jews got influenced by this Greek ideology. You can think about today if we have such a similar thing happening. Unfortunately, many Jews have taken on this secular ideology and taken secular values and put it into Judaism and have called that Judaism. And unfortunately, that happened also at the time of Chanukah. There were Jews who were so influenced by the Greek culture that they really wanted to be Greeks and abandon this lofty Jewish ideal of selflessness and living for Hashem. And unfortunately, we have that today. That's why. That's why.
Now, where did that tune come from?
What?
The Maosu tune.
I have no idea.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good tune.
Secular or is it Jewish?
I don't know. People have theories, but who knows? I know. I think they say Chabad. Chabad. They have Napoleon's March, the tune, which they took from Napoleon's soldiers. Dun 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 dun. No, a different thing.
Oh.
They one of the Chabad Nigunim is Napoleon's March, which they took from Napoleon's army. I think the theory, and there's some Hasidic concept. I don't know. You have to ask them at Chabad that you take the power of the force that you're taking their song, like you're taking their strength or taking their malach or something like that. So I'm not familiar with these concepts, but I think there's something like that. That's why interesting. Many say that there's no Megillah. We don't read a Megillah by Chanukah. We only read a Megillah on Purim, because Purim was a war against our bodies, and we won. It was over. We finished, so we could write a story about it. But there's no Megillah on Chanukah that we read, because the battle of Chanukah rages on. We still have this battle of the influences of the secular culture, where we have that pull to not want to live for our lofty, selfless reasons, but to rather get pulled into the secular culture and just live for ourselves and our own selfish ideologies. I mentioned this. I've written about it. I mentioned this last week somewhere. I just thought it was. I know you didn't like it so much, but the Yerushalmi. What I'm about to say, I remember you didn't like so much. I think. I'm about to say it. You'll tell me if you like it, but I think you didn't like this. I'm going to say it anyway. Yerushalmi says that one of the things that the Greeks did was make the Jews play sports on Shabbos. All right, if you think about it, it makes sense. So the Greeks would want to do that because Shabbos, when we keep Shabbos, we testify to the fact that God exists. He created the world, and there's an infusion of spirituality of the day where it's much easier for us to connect to God, connect to Hashem. And the Greeks, that was, again, totally against everything they believed in. What did they believe in? The power of themselves, the selfishness. So that's why they played sports. They competed naked, right, in the Olympics, just to worship the body, worship themselves. So they wanted to make the Jews agree to that ideology, abandon spirituality by competing in sports, specifically on Shabbos. So I just mentioned that there's a woman, Bracha Deutsch, who is, right now you know what I'm talking about. She is she's a religious woman who competes in marathons. And she has 5 kids. She works, but she won the Jerusalem Marathon, and she had was going to try out for the Olympics, and she had a real shot at getting the gold in the marathon. But in Tokyo in 2020, right, they changed it to Shabbos. So right away she said, "I'm not going to do it. Shabbos is more important to me than winning to winning the marathon." And I just thought it was very appropriate that right before Shabbos, when the Greeks tried to make us play sports on Shabbos, this woman had the strength to say, no, Shabbos is more important than competing in athletic competition.
Even if it's not Shabbos, what would the Hashmonaim say?
I don't know. You'd have to ask them.
Yeah, I'm saying,
Yeah, it depends.
The idea of sports, competitive sports, and parading in
Oh, you're saying in general, right?
In general, that's a Jewish thing.
Yeah, it seems. You're right.
Jewish thing.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. Right, you're saying athletic competition in general, right? Just to be just to be more powerful than the other person. It's not a Jewish thing, but in general, sports and exercise is a Jewish thing. But when it comes to the point of I have to be better than the other person, right? That's not a good thing, right? Right. But it still was nice, even though she was engaging in that. It was nice that she did not. She kept Shabbos as opposed to. Yeah, Shabbos saving. Well, that's a lot of famous stories like that. Shabbos saving. So just to conclude, Chanukah, we have a spiritual infusion. Hashem gives us the ability to come closer to Him, the bigger opportunity than we have the rest of the year. It's a great time to rededicate ourselves to what it means to be Jews, to rededicate ourselves to Torah, to mitzvos, to learn how to live selflessly, to learn what it means to be a human. What are we doing here? What makes us different than animals, right? We live for a higher purpose. We answer to a higher authority, like certain kashrus organizations. Or hot dogs. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so let's try our best to make the most of this Chanukah, and thanks for coming. Sorry I didn't have latkes. Apologize.